Instead, we will prevail by being strong and smart, resilient and relentless. First, our military will continue to hunt down terrorist plotters in any country where it is necessary. Second, we will continue to provide training and equipment to tens of thousands of Iraqi and Syrian forces fighting ISIL on the ground so that we take away their safe havens. Third, we're working with friends and allies to stop ISIL's operations, to disrupt plots, cut off their financing, and prevent them from recruiting more fighters. Fourth, with American leadership, the international community has begun to establish a process and timeline to pursue ceasefires and a political resolution to the Syrian war.
In his Oval Office address last night, President Obama finally called the San Bernardino shooting what it was, a terror attack. Of course, he didn't mention the words radical Islamic terrorists, but did any of us really expect him to do that? Obama also retroactively called the Fort Hood shooting and the Chattanooga shooting terrorist attacks, something everyone else in America has known all along. Obama's four-step plan, though, was garbage. He's still not showing any leadership, his steps were non-specific, and his tone non-decisive. Obama urged Americans not to give in to fear, which would be great advice if we had any confidence that he was doing his best to defend our nation. Instead, according to U.S. officials, the shooter from the San Bernardino attack, the woman, passed a K-1 visa test in 2014 before she was allowed to enter the country, and her husband, the other shooter, was not on any U.S. terror watch lists. Here with me now is an American journalist, editor, and political activist. He is the president of the Foundation of Defense of Democracies, Clifford May. Clifford, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
What was your reaction to the president's address last night?
Not very different from yours. He said very little that's new. He made it clear that the conflict, the global conflict in which we're now enmeshed and which has gotten a lot worse over the past 7 years, is not about to get any better. He's not going to do anything more. He's going to hand it off to the next administration, who will, and hopefully the next administration will begin to come up with a strategy for defeating jihadism, radical Islam, call it what you will. We can talk about what this ideology means. It's not that complicated, but it needs to be defeated. And right now, it is growing. It is in more countries than ever, and it is. And the flames that are raging through the Middle East are throwing off sparks everywhere from Paris to California.
Did you think his four steps, which he presented as if they were something original or as if they were a continuation of his already successful strategy, do they seem any different to you than what he's doing now? Because it seems to me he's the only one that thinks his own strategy is going well.
The strategy is, well, I don't think there actually is a strategy. I think there are various things, there are activities that are taking place that are meant to give the impression of a strategy, but I don't think you can define the strategy. The bombing runs, which are few and far between, they're not obviously doing a great deal of damage to the Islamic State. We are about to do something, I think, remarkable. According to the State Department, the most important leading sponsor of terrorism in the world today is not the Islamic State, it's the Islamic Republic of Iran. And we are on track now, thanks to President Obama, to giving them over $100 billion, which they will use to sponsor further terrorism. We know that's true. They have a Hezbollah, the deadly terrorist foreign militia, active not just in Lebanon, but also in Syria. So there is no strategy. He's doing certain things to make it appear that he's fighting, but there is no real fight going on.
Right, there's no recognition of the true threat there's no recognition of the true threat of the radical Islamic beliefs, which is what fuels this terrorism. Now, let me get to something specific, because you mentioned Iran, and I also want to touch on something related to the other controversy, the Syrian refugees and the vetting process. Now, this is more specific to the San Bernardino shooters, but the woman terrorist, the wife of the husband-wife duo who were the shooters, she was granted entry to our country on a fiancé visa, a K-1 visa. Now, can you explain to us a little bit what the process for background checks or security screenings are that come with that visa?
We don't know exactly, and the State Department hasn't been very clear, except to say that they continually refine them and try to make this process better. What we do know is that those who handle consular duties abroad tend to be young Foreign Service officers, not a lot of experience. I think we know that we don't have an adequate vetting process. That's why a lot of people in Congress have said we need a pause before we continue to take in refugees, immigrants, particularly from those countries in which various forms of jihadism are preached and practiced. And the president doesn't want to do any of that. But we pretty much do not have, I think everybody knows, secure borders. It's sort of a screen door on broken hinges at this point. And we need to do something about that. And Europe needs to do something about it. Although I think it's looking very doubtful we will during this administration, or that Europe will, although that could change.
Now, there were reports this morning that this woman attended religious schools, Islamic religious schools, potentially even radical Islamic religious schools in Pakistan when she lived there. Now, should this have been a red flag? Should she have been flagged in some way before she was granted access to the United States, even on a fiancé visa?
You would think so, but again, if you are talking only, as the president does, about violent extremism, if you are saying Islam has nothing to do with this, then the fact that she went to madrasas would not be a red flag. And you would not look further to see who funded these madrasas and what was being taught. She also lived in Saudi Arabia. And there are some reports that her father became radicalized, and that's a funny word to use. We can talk about that in Saudi Arabia. But that's also part of it. The president says, look, and he did say this much on Sunday night, there are interpretations of Islam that are not tolerant. Well, the two most important countries in the world to Islam are Saudi Arabia and Iran. And they are not tolerant countries. They're not tolerant of Christians. They're not tolerant of Jews. They're not tolerant of other Muslims who are not of their particular sect. We know that. There are, in fact, more than 50 countries that are members of what's called the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any of them in which minorities have equal rights to those of Muslims in those countries. So it should be, it should have raised a red flag that she had lived in Saudi Arabia, should have raised a red flag if she had gone to a religious school in Pakistan, also not a tolerant country. It didn't, because we are not taking the ideology seriously. We have no, in the government, coherent analysis of those who have declared themselves our enemy and who say they are waging a jihad against us.
Now, do you think that this occurrence, the fact that this woman came and potentially even radicalized her husband here, does this negate Obama's claim that those who oppose Syrian refugees are off basis because most of the Syrian refugees, he says, are women and children, widows or families, and people who are non-threatening? Does it negate that argument?
It doesn't really. I mean, if you're looking for the profile of a terrorist, it's generally more likely to be a young male from a Muslim country. No question about that. That's just statistically more likely to be the case. It was the case of all the terrorists in Paris, the terrorists in Chattanooga, Major Nidal Hassan at Fort Hood. There are some women involved in it as terrorists as well. That has been the case for the past few years. Part of the problem is that, of course, the Islamic State and others will try to plant terrorists among the migrants or refugees, call them what you will. But the other problem we have to look at is that after a little while, how ripe for radicalization, for recruitment to a terrorist cause will these people be as they get older, particularly if they are not integrating well, if they find that they don't learn the language well, they don't have a good job? Will they say, I'm at fault here, I have to work harder? Or will they say, society's at fault, society owes me, and I'm going to punish society for that? I think we have a real problem. It would seem to me that it's time to examine what's best for the United States, for Americans, in terms of our immigration policies. Doesn't mean we don't take immigrants. We do. Doesn't mean we don't take Muslim immigrants. Of course we do. But we also need to vet them very carefully and know who we're taking in and what they're doing here.
Right. We just need to ensure that the vetting process is thorough, that this occurrence wouldn't happen again, or if there were others who slipped through the cracks, like this woman terrorist seemed to have, that it doesn't happen again. Clifford, I appreciate your insight on this issue, and I hope you'll come back on the program again. Still ahead, a millennial voice speaking up for traditional values and love of country. Author Demetrius Minor joins me next.